Imagine this. One day, you find your old PlayStation, or maybe your old Nintendo. You plug it in, and it doesn't work anymore. The controller is broken. The disk drive won't read games. Or maybe you sold it years ago, and now you wish you still had it. So, does that mean those games are gone forever? Not exactly. That's where emulation comes in. For many people, emulation is simply a way to play old games on a modern PC or phone, but it's actually much bigger than that. Emulation has helped save gaming history. It has allowed millions of people to experience classic games that would otherwise disappear with old hardware. Today, we're going to look at how emulation started, why it became so popular, and why it's still one of the most important parts of gaming today. Let's go back more than 30 years. In the early 1990s, personal computers started becoming much more powerful. For the first time, some programmers wondered, what if a computer could pretend to be another game console? That simple idea became the beginning of emulation. At first, these projects were very small. Most were built by hobby programmers who simply loved learning how game consoles worked. They weren't big companies, they weren't making money, they were just passionate gamers and developers trying to understand old hardware. One of the biggest early projects was MAME. MAME stands for Multiple Arcade Machine Emulator. It was released in 1997. Its goal wasn't to sell games. Its goal was to preserve arcade history. Many arcade machines were disappearing from the world. Their hardware was getting old. Parts were becoming impossible to replace. Without preservation, thousands of arcade games could simply vanish forever. MAME helped stop that from happening. Around the same time, people also started creating emulators for home consoles. The Nintendo Entertainment System, the Sega Genesis, and later the Super Nintendo. Programs like Nisticle and SNES became incredibly popular. Suddenly, you could play games like Super Mario Bros., Super Mario World, The Legend of Zelda, Sonic the Hedgehog, and Chrono Trigger on your computer. For many gamers, it felt like magic. But emulation also introduced something completely new, features that original consoles never had. For example, save states. Instead of waiting until you reached a checkpoint, you could save your game at any moment, even during a boss fight. Another popular feature was fast forward. Grinding through slow parts of a game became much quicker. Some emulators even added better graphics, higher resolutions, custom controllers, and online multiplayer years after those games were originally released. Emulation wasn't just preserving games, it was improving them. As computers became even more powerful, developers aimed even higher. The original PlayStation, the Nintendo 64, the Sega Dreamcast. These systems were much harder to copy, but little by little developers figured them out. Projects like EPSXE and Project 64 became favorites among gamers. For the first time, players could enjoy PlayStation and Nintendo 64 games on their computer. Of course, not everyone was happy about this. Game companies started paying attention. Nintendo, Sony, Sega, they worried about something called ROMs. A ROM is basically a copy of a game's data. While emulator software is generally legal in many countries, sharing copyrighted game files without permission is usually not. That's where most legal problems begin. One of the biggest legal battles happened when Sony sued the creators of Bleem, a commercial PlayStation emulator. Although Bleem eventually disappeared, the case helped shape how emulator projects would move forward. Since then, most emulator developers have been very careful. Their message is usually simple. The emulator itself is legal, but users should only play games they legally own. Even with these legal challenges, emulation continued growing, and honestly, gaming history is better because of it. Think about all the old consoles sitting in storage rooms today. Many no longer work, replacement parts are becoming harder to find every year. Disk drives fail, cartridges stop working, batteries inside old game cartridges eventually die. Without preservation, many games could disappear forever. That's why museums, researchers, and gaming historians now see emulation as something very important. It's helping protect digital history. Then something interesting happened. Even the companies that once fought against emulation started using it themselves. Nintendo released the Virtual Console, Sony released the PlayStation Classic, Sega launched the Genesis Mini. All of these official products relied on emulation technology. That shows just how useful emulation really is. Over time, community projects became even better. One of the biggest examples is RetroArch. Instead of installing lots of different emulators, RetroArch lets you play many different consoles inside one simple program. Whether you want Atari, NES, Game Boy, PlayStation, or PlayStation 2, everything can be managed in one place. It also includes modern features like beautiful screen filters, online multiplayer, controller customization, achievements, and much more. Today's emulators are far more advanced than anyone imagined 30 years ago, but the challenges haven't disappeared. Modern consoles are much more complicated than older ones. The PlayStation 4, the PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series X, these systems use incredibly advanced hardware. That makes them much harder to emulate. Still, developers continue making amazing progress. Just look at PlayStation 4 emulation. Not long ago, people thought it would take many years before real progress happened. Now, several games are already booting. Some are even becoming playable. That's moving faster than many people expected. The Nintendo Switch is another interesting story. Two major emulators became incredibly popular, Yuzu and Ryujin. In many cases, they even allowed some Switch games to run better than the original hardware. But eventually, Nintendo took legal action. Both projects were affected and development slowed or stopped. That reminded everyone that emulation is not only a technical challenge, it's also a legal one. Another challenge is online games. Many modern games depend on company servers. When those servers shut down, the game often becomes impossible to play, even if you still own the game. Preserving those experiences is becoming one of the biggest problems facing the gaming industry today. Looking ahead, the future of emulation still looks very exciting. Computers continue becoming more powerful, developers continue learning, and new emulator projects appear every year. Some of today's impossible goals may become tomorrow's everyday reality. At the end of the day, emulation isn't just about playing old games for free, it's about preserving gaming history. It's about understanding how classic consoles worked. It's about helping future generations experience games that changed the industry forever. Without emulation, many of gaming's greatest classics could eventually disappear. Instead, they continue to live on. New players discover them, old fans revisit them, researchers study them, and developers learn from them. That's why emulation has become much more than a hobby. It's become one of the most important tools for protecting the history of video games. And judging by how quickly technology keeps improving, we're probably only seeing the beginning of what emulation will be able to do in the years ahead.